The Middle East has changed forever. After growing tensions and ongoing skirmishes along its northern border with Hezbollah, Israel launched one of the most impressive attacks I've ever seen. It started with a pager attack where Israel denied Hezbollah's communications platforms by basically making those devices magically explode, before beginning an airstrike campaign that's eliminated virtually the entire upper echelon of Hezbollah's leadership, including its Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah. If you watched my live stream from much earlier this year, basically deep diving into Hezbollah, you would know that Nasrallah, as well as many of his key leaders, have been in Hezbollah and have been leading Hezbollah for a very long time, for decades, basically since the organization was founded in 1980 or shortly thereafter. Their deaths mark a generational shift for Hezbollah, even though it's involuntary. At the same time, Israel is keeping the pressure on, this time moving forces across the border into Lebanon for the first time since the 2005 war. And all of this has led to Iran launching yet another massive ballistic missile attack on Israel. And that takes us to where we are right now, basically within a giant regional war. Let's start by talking about the impact that Nasrallah's death will have not only on the war, but on the Middle East. What will the defeat of Hezbollah mean to the Middle East, and what will Iran do about it? I also want to finish by examining the current calls for peace and kind of why they fall a little bit short of the mark, or why they're kind of missing the point of what this conflict is right now. Now on to the death of Nasrallah. As I've mentioned, he's been in this world for a long time. He's also been a very long-time ally of Iran, where he visited frequently during his time as a student. He's a known quantity not only to Iran, but also to Israel. To Iran, he's a key ally in charge of Iran's crown jewel in their axis of resistance. No other proxy is as well equipped or as well funded as Hezbollah, and given Hezbollah's position in Lebanon, none is as capable of impacting Israel, not even Iran. To Israel, though, he is a longtime enemy and somebody whose death doesn't come soon enough. In fact, Financial Times reports that Israel originally planned to kill Nasrallah shortly after the October 7th attacks, but the White House learned about the plans and demanded that Israel call off the strike. Since that attempt, Hezbollah has kept troops on the northern border, targeting Israeli towns and villages with rockets and missiles, as well as Israeli troops. Nasrallah has for a long time pitted himself and Hezbollah as a protector of Lebanese sovereignty. However, in practice, he was a key ally of Iran and ensured Israel always had to consider Hezbollah as a threat in the north while dealing with Hamas in the south. With the large and sophisticated mix of capabilities that Hezbollah has, Israel has had to consider the threat of ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as cross-border infiltrations by small groups of fighters, similar to the attacks by Hamas on October 7th. With the death of Nasrallah, Hezbollah loses its head, but it goes much deeper than that. Israel killed multiple other key leaders across other areas of Hezbollah's political and military organizations, to the point that only a handful of key leaders remain. Hezbollah is not only without their top leader, it's without their top echelon of leaders. This leaves the mid to low tiers of Hezbollah to pick up the pieces alongside the remaining top leadership. Not only will this impact the medium and long-term strategic vision of Hezbollah and its ability to move forward on its medium to long-term plans, it will also impact its short-term ability to respond to these attacks in a cohesive manner. But that has not stopped Hezbollah from trying. Hezbollah attacks using ballistic missiles and rockets have targeted areas further south in Israel, namely towards the middle of Israel near Tel Aviv. This is important to note because up to this point, most Hezbollah attacks have targeted the north of Israel. And so moving south and targeting further south in Israel really mark a strategic shift for Hezbollah, showing that they're willing to target further south into bigger population centers like Tel Aviv. And that's something that Israel is not going to be overly fond of. The Houthis have also attempted to launch ballistic missiles at Israel following the death of Nasrallah. However, those attacks have also been defended. The IDF responded to these strikes with even more airstrikes, with strikes in Lebanon appearing to shape the battlefield for a ground invasion in the south, and the strikes in Yemen targeting key sites for the Houthis. And of course, that takes us to now where the ground invasion has begun. You may also remember from past videos that Hezbollah played a key role in Syria in defending the Assad regime during the Syrian civil war and in helping fight ISIS. Following news of Nasrallah's death, video emerged showing Syrians celebrating in the streets. While the Syrian civil war has been in a sort of a hibernation period, the destruction of Hezbollah, or at least Hezbollah's key leadership, may open opportunities for anti-Assad groups to get active again. This may happen with the encouragement of Israel in an effort to disrupt Iran's support for Hezbollah. But that's just a guess by me, so take that for what it is. Now that Hezbollah's key leaders have been eliminated, Israel has begun its ground invasion. One U.S. official stated that Israel had told the United States that this invasion will be more limited than the 2005 invasion and will be focused on dismantling Hezbollah infrastructure along the border. This makes sense for a number of reasons. One, it reduces risk to the IDF. Hezbollah has long pinned themselves as the protectors of Lebanon, having formed in the 1980s and gaining significant popularity in Lebanon during the 2005 war against Israel. Limiting the size of the invasion for Israel may prevent Hezbollah from achieving success in recruitment. It may also prevent Hezbollah from seizing the initiative in the information environment. It will also reduce the geographic footprint in Lebanon where IDF troops will be fighting on Hezbollah's home turf. Hezbollah will no doubt be dug in and prepared to defend. And even though the upper leadership has been eliminated, the lower levels are still completely combat capable and dangerous. Second, it reduces the scope of the invasion and makes it easier to get out. The UN and Lebanese military are also the ones that should be responsible for enforcing security between the Litani River and the Israeli border per UN Resolution 1701. And while they've thus far failed to do just that, an Israeli invasion partially into the borders of Lebanon might jumpstart the UN and Lebanon into action. But that's just me being optimistic here. Prior to the invasion, the UN and Lebanese forces moved north of the Litani River as well to de-escalate and deconflict. Benjamin Netanyahu released a video addressing the Lebanese people, but he then released a second video addressing the Iranian people. In that video, he described a future for Iran where the people are free, foreign investment pours in, and Iran is virtually a completely different country, free from the current leadership. He then says that Iran will be free faster than people realize. And this to me is very interesting. Israel has the capability of striking Iran. However, more interestingly, they also have the ability to target key leadership inside Iran. We know this because they've targeted key personnel within Iran's nuclear program, and they also killed Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. In an interview with CNN, former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad described how Iran created a new agency designed to root out and target Mossad agents in Iran, only to discover that the man in charge of that agency, as well as many of his key staff members, were all Mossad agents themselves. This is pretty hilarious, and it's also a great example of just how deeply Israel has infiltrated Iran. Iran also has internal unrest to worry about. While the protests have largely subsided, the issues weren't resolved. And should key leadership in Iran be killed and internal unrest be revived, the Iranian regime will be faced with a nightmare scenario. And of course, that takes us to the challenging position that Iran finds themselves in right now. And yes, they did just launch a massive ballistic missile attack on Israel. An attack that consisted of somewhere near 200 missiles. While Iran publicly stated that this strike was in response to the killings of Haniyeh and Nasrallah, it's really an open question of just exactly how far they're willing to go and how much they mean it. Meaning, once Israel responds in kind, what will Iran do about that response? Are we going to find ourselves in a reciprocal escalation pattern until we end up in a full-scale war? Or will we stay in this kind of like a lower-level war between Israel and Iran like what we're at right now? Economically, Iran is a mess. Politically, it's a very sensitive time, and militarily, they have to rely on ballistic missiles and a large proxy network to actually fight Israel. Granted, that ballistic missile capability is pretty huge and well protected, with a large network of underground facilities. The proxy network is also pretty huge and well funded and equipped. But if Israelis fight against Hezbollah so far has shown us anything, it's that Iran might need a couple extra options. Israel, however, has demonstrated the ability to target key sites in Iran, not only with agents on the ground, but from the air. Following April's exchange of fire, Israel struck an air defense radar inside Iran using F-35 aircraft without being spotted or targeted in return. In a wartime scenario, Israel wouldn't just be targeting air defense sites. They could also be targeting nuclear facilities, IRGC bases, and other regime sites to enable larger social unrest in the country, while also preventing Iran from striking back. Back in October, following the October 7th attacks, I made a video about how Israel found itself in a lose-lose situation. Now it's Iran's turn to be in a lose-lose position. Either they go to a full-scale war and support Hezbollah, their prized proxy that's at severe risk of collapse, or they don't go to war and not only lose Hezbollah, but potentially a lot more. This is an existential threat to the Iranian regime because the collapse of the axis of resistance would not only greatly endanger Iran's power projection project throughout the Middle East, it would open up vulnerabilities inside of Iran that Israel is more than willing to exploit. Conversely, a war against Israel will just invite superior firepower into Iran to target Iranian leadership, and that's not going to be pretty either. And you can tell how desperate Iran is getting right now because of how their assassination campaign has spooled up. Not only have U.S. officials confirmed Iranian assassination plots against Trump and Mike Pompeo, as well as other former members of the Trump admin, Israel has also confirmed assassination plots inside Israel. While Iran may not want war, it may not be able to avoid one, so they appear to be attempting to target key leadership themselves. And so that takes us to the fact that we've probably been in a regional war for a little while now. It's just been a lower level regional war, but we are right now probably at the beginning of the full-scale regional war between Israel and Iran. This is something that we've been talking about since the October 7th attacks as being a risk, and really it's just continued to get worse and worse ever since. And honestly, it was a long shot that this was going to be avoided, but here we are anyway. Whatever the result, the face of the Middle East is about to change. Even if the Iranian regime and Hezbollah survive this somehow, they're going to be in different fashions. There's going to be a new face of Hezbollah for sure. There's going to be a question of if there's going to be a new face to Iran as well. And the overall image of their power in the Middle East is going to change as well. There are still ways for them to find off-ramps. However, it appears that with Israel really going after Hezbollah in a pretty intent manner, Iran's going to have to make a decision on just how far they're willing to go to protect Hezbollah. And again, that takes us back to the quandary we've already discussed. This also takes me to the calls for a ceasefire. We're to a point now where I'm not exactly sure that a ceasefire in Gaza is going to make a difference in Lebanon. I think these two conflicts are pretty well decoupled by this point. They're just two separate fronts in a larger war for Israel right now. Both Hezbollah and Hamas appear like they want to continue to fight for better positioning before any kind of end of the fighting begins. And Israel appears more than willing to continue the fight themselves as well. So no matter how many people call for a ceasefire, it appears that the main parties involved in this war aren't really interested at this time. And even if we were able to kind of wave a wand and magically establish a ceasefire right now, I don't think that that would necessarily be a good thing because it doesn't exactly solve anything. Nothing has been solved in this conflict. Hamas still exists and Israel's not going to tolerate their existence. And on the flip side, IDF troops continue to operate in Gaza, which is something that Hamas is not going to be willing to accept. Israel's also done so much damage in Gaza that it's really just an inevitability at this point that the next war is going to kick off once this younger generation grows up, is able to organize and get equipped, and then start fighting Israel in revenge of basically this childhood that they've lost. It's grim, but that's my assessment. But right now I'd argue that the war in Lebanon is right now an existential fight for Hezbollah, and that they're not necessarily paying as much attention to what's going on in Gaza. Right now, they're just fighting against Israel themselves in their own fight right now. And therefore, while Hamas will have to bargain for their own peace, so will Hezbollah. It's just a question right now on whether or not Iran gets involved and to what depth they choose to get involved and what impact that has on the war, as well as how both Israel and Iran pursue peace following the outbreak of that conflict. Now, with all that said, I want to hear your thoughts on this, so comment your thoughts below. Let's continue this conversation. If you found this video to be helpful or informative, definitely leave a like. It helps this video reach new audiences, and subscribe for more analysis not only on this conflict, but also on the war in Ukraine and other conflicts as they come up. With all that, I'll see y'all next time. Later.